The cultural exchange hall shimmered with soft lights and gentle music, a celebration of harmless pets from across the galaxy. The Varellans showcased a glowing flutter beast, drifting peacefully in its containment bubble. The Vorakai cuddled their moss creature as it purred like a warm engine. The Yilt proudly displayed a gelatinous orb that changed colors when stroked. The aliens smiled. The atmosphere was calm. Everything was peaceful. Until Damon Hale walked in carrying a violently shaking crate. "Is that the human's pet?" someone whispered. Damon set the crate down. "Yeah, she's harmless." The room leaned closer, curious, delighted. A claw punched through the side of the crate. The room leaned back, screaming. The honey badger stepped out, sniffed the air, and hissed. The flutter beast fainted mid-air. Damon sighed. Okay, fine. No eating the ambassadors." The honey badger turned its small, scarred face toward him and blinked. Its nose twitched. Then, with the deliberate confidence of a creature that feared absolutely nothing, it sat down at Damon's feet like a dog waiting for a snack. The chaos froze. Varellan envoys hovered midair, long tendrils coiled protectively around their flutter beast's containment bubble. A Vorakai diplomat pulled his moss pet tightly to his chest, muttering low humming notes of alarm. One of the Yilt accidentally absorbed its cuddle creature into its gelatinous torso. "Harmless?" wheezed Administrator Gelthor, the eight-limbed operations director of Kessari Station. "She is," Damon replied, casually cracking his knuckles. "Unless someone throws a squirrel at her, or a cobra, or, a group of baboons. She hates baboons." Gelthor's three central eyes blinked asynchronously. What is a baboon?" "A type of primate. Real bitey, big fangs. She took down 4 of them once after they stole her snacks." There was a pause. The honey badger yawned. Gelthor looked like he was going to faint. Across the hall, a Virellan youth tugged excitedly on a chaperone's wing. "It's so small. I want to pet it." "Absolutely not," the chaperone said, wings flaring in a defensive shimmer. "Look at its teeth. And its posture." A soft murmur spread through the crowd, observations, awe, confusion. "Is that fur or quills? It moves like a scout beast. Why are its eyes so judgmental?" Damon knelt beside the honey badger and unhooked a miniature harness from the crate. She let him clip it on without resistance. Her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the room like she was assembling an assassination plan just in case. "I named her Susan," Damon said. The crowd fell silent. "I beg your pardon?" asked Gelthor. "Susan, like my aunt, they've got the same personality." Someone fainted in the background. Administrator Gelthor coughed, readjusted his ceremonial sash, and attempted to regain control of the situation. "Very well, Technician Hale, per Council Regulation 8C, you were invited to submit a harmless terrestrial species for interspecies cultural exchange. You were aware of the context?" "Yeah, of course," Damon said, scratching Susan behind the ears. She leaned into it with alarming intensity. "You said, harmless Earth pet. She's from Earth. She's a pet." "Nailed it." One of the Vorakai raised a vine-like appendage. "You do not fear it?" "Nah," Damon said. "She's a sweetheart. Raised her from a pup after I found her chewing through my toolbox." Another voice, higher pitched and anxious, piped up from the crowd. "It chewed tools?" "Yup, ate a screwdriver, passed the handle 3 days later. Not even mad. That thing was made of reinforced polymer." Administrator Gelthor looked like he needed a break, possibly a vacation, possibly off-planet. But protocol demanded a formal presentation, and now the entire council was watching, so he cleared his throat and waved toward a containment booth. "Technician Hale, if you would kindly guide your companion to display enclosure 4, we may begin the demonstration." Damon nodded. "Sure, come on, Susan." She followed, tail twitching. The booth shimmered to life, a high-security enclosure designed to safely display exotic fauna. Damon stepped in first, then coaxed Susan inside with a treat from his vest pocket. She took it, sniffed, and crunched it loudly. Metal? Bone? The audience didn't know, and they didn't want to. The barrier sealed behind them with a pleasant chime. Administrator Gelthor began the formal introduction. Behold, citizens of Kessari Station, Earth's contribution to this year's Cultural Exchange Expo, a small terrestrial mammal of the mustelid family, known to humans as the honey badger. Soft ooze rose from the audience. Observe its compact stature, its dense fur, its mammalian warmth. Susan sat on her haunches and stared directly at the closest alien child. Note its small size, suggesting a low threat rating. Susan snarled. The alien child screamed. Damon rubbed his temples. Susan, no bullying. She huffed and looked away. The booth's AI display lit up with information. Species, Mellivora capensis. Mass, 13 kilograms. Height, 28 centimeters at shoulder. Behavioral profile. Temperament, inconclusive. Threat rating, recalculating. Suddenly, Susan stood up, nose twitching. Across the room, a floating moss pet drifted too close to the containment booth. Susan charged the barrier. The impact rattled the enclosure. The moss pet squealed and zipped away. Screams echoed through the expo. Damon snapped his fingers. Susan! She froze, mid-growl. Not food, he said sternly. After a long pause, she dropped back to the floor, tail twitching. Several council members fainted. Technician Hale, Gelthor barked. Did you not review the containment safety protocols? Sure I did. Look, she hasn't even broken anything. Behind him, the booth's rear panel sparked as Susan clawed a scanner off the wall. It flickered, then shorted. Okay, Damon amended. Barely broken anything. Gelthor's limbs shook with bureaucratic fury. Your pet has damaged a level 2 containment unit. That's rated for up to 5 Vorakai ripple bears. Well, you're not going to want to test it on ripple bears now, Damon muttered. Pretty sure Susan's claimed this territory. An emergency barrier dropped from the ceiling around the enclosure. Alarms whooped. Damon calmly stepped out before it sealed. Susan stayed seated inside, licking her claws. Security teams arrived seconds later, weapons drawn. Stand down, Damon called. It's fine. She's just getting used to the place. The lead guard aimed a stun beam through the barrier. Sir, step away from the containment. Susan, Damon said. She looked up. Sit. She sat. The entire crowd gasped. A Yilt ambassador dropped their teacup. It obeys? Course she does. She's trained. The room reeled. This, more than anything, unsettled them. That such a creature could be trained, that a human could wield that kind of control, didn't align with anything the interspecies psychological models had predicted. The moss pet's handler sobbed quietly. A Vorakai whispered, "What else do humans train?" And that's when the booth exploded. Well, not exploded, but the panel Susan had been casually dismantling finally gave way. With a flick of her claws and a short grunt, she popped out of the rear enclosure and trotted toward Damon, unconcerned. The security team panicked. Weapons raised. Damon held up a hand. Don't. She's escaping. She's not escaping, Damon said. She's leaving. Susan reached his feet, yawned again, and lay down. She looked up at him. Then she growled. But not at the crowd. She was staring at the ceiling vents. Damon frowned. What is it, girl? Administrator Gelthor exhaled, exhausted. Perhaps we should end the presentation here. Susan snarled louder. The sound was different, sharper, not a threat, but a warning. She stood again, eyes fixed upward. The station systems hummed gently. Everything seemed normal. But Susan didn't relax. And Damon, after a long moment, didn't either. He said, I think she hears something we don't. The room tensed. Gelthor glanced at the security chief. Scan the ducts. Already on it. Nothing came up. But Susan didn't move. She stood rigid, tail bristling, growling at a patch of seemingly empty air. The Varellans whispered among themselves. The Vorakai drew their pets closer. The Yilt slowly edged away from the center. Damon knelt beside her. You found something, didn't you? Susan chuffed once, then looked at him, expectantly. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. And for the first time that day, Damon Hale began to think that maybe Susan hadn't been the problem. She might just be the warning. Susan stared at the ceiling vent like it had personally insulted her. Her fur bristled. Her stance tightened. The cultural exchange hall, already recovering from the shattered containment booth, descended once more into nervous chaos. Only Damon seemed calm, which worried the others even more. "What is it sensing?" Administrator Gelthor asked, craning his eye stalks upward. "Dunno," Damon replied, kneeling beside the honey badger. "But if she's not relaxed, I'm not relaxed." Susan chuffed in agreement. A few species recoiled in sync. Security teams, still hovering nearby, hesitated at the shift. Their weapons didn't drop, but their hands grew less confident. Whatever this tiny predator was reacting to, it wasn't visible on sensors, and that made it worse. One of the Yilt technicians, pulsing green with stress, whispered to a colleague. "It reacted before any of our instruments." "Impossible. That vent is empty. Thermal, seismic, biosignature, all clean." Susan growled low and steady. The vent cover popped loose. Damon stood immediately. "Move." It happened fast. A blur of something translucent, jagged, wrong burst from the duct. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a terrier, but it didn't move like an animal. It slithered through open air with disturbing grace, curling mid-leap toward the nearest light source. Susan intercepted. She launched herself upward with shocking agility, claws extended, jaws wide. She caught the blur mid-flight, tumbled with it across the expo floor, and slammed it into a food dispenser so hard it broke the coolant seal. The lights flickered. The thing now briefly visible screamed, not audibly. The air shivered. Virellans collapsed, Vorakai trembled, and several flutter beasts passed out mid-hover. Susan didn't flinch. She bit down. The scream stopped. Silence fell. Damon approached slowly, pulling a thick cloth from his belt pouch. Susan stood aside, panting, blood on her snout. Beneath her, the thing now twitching revealed itself, a chitinous parasite with camouflaging skin and hundreds of filament legs that retracted like needles. A Yilt observer gagged. Administrator Gelthor's voice returned in a whisper. "What is that?" The station's biology unit arrived just then, lured by the alarms. One of them scanned the carcass with a trembling hand. "No match," the lead biologist muttered. "Unknown species. No prior scans. It's not in our xenofauna index." Susan sat back on her haunches, satisfied. Damon nodded. She's got a good nose for trouble. News spread fast. Within an hour, the cultural exchange hall was under lockdown. The flutter beasts were evacuated. The moss pets were wrapped in emergency moss blankets. The gelatinous orbs retreated into nutrient stasis. And Susan, the apex of small terrestrial terror, sat peacefully on a snack crate, licking her paws while being watched by 17 security cameras and 5 different science teams. "She's fine now," Damon said for the 5th time. "She was never fine," Gelthor snapped, pacing nervously. Susan has just killed an unidentified invasive organism before any of our sensors even knew it was there." "She's got instincts," Damon said, scratching her head. "You brought a biological weapon to a cultural showcase." "She's not a weapon, she's just stubborn." Gelthor pointed a trembling claw at the cooling vent system. That parasite was breaching our main oxygen duct. Had she not attacked it, the consequences could have been catastrophic. "She saved the station," Damon said plainly. Gelthor made a strangled sound somewhere between a cough and a diplomatic scream. "Do you understand the implications?" Damon shrugged. "Yeah, you owe Susan a medal." A hastily convened emergency session of the station's council began within 2 hours, not in the grand chamber that was still being decontaminated, but in a secure operations bay 2 levels below. Susan was there too. In a reinforced enclosure, which she was ignoring entirely, since Damon had given her a blanket and half a sandwich. The council chamber buzzed with voices. "This is an interspecies emergency. It's an Earth emergency. Should we evacuate? What if there are more of those things? What else do humans call harmless?" Damon sat quietly, sipping from a hydration pouch. Gelthor finally raised a limb and called for silence. "We are not here to assign blame." "I'm not blaming Susan," someone interrupted. "But we must address the Misunderstanding. Damon raised an eyebrow. You asked for a harmless pet. That's not a pet, someone whispered. She lives in my quarters, eats when I eat, watches old space westerns with me. If that's not a pet, I don't know what is. One of the Virellan science delegates raised a wingtip. We have reviewed footage. The organism Susan neutralized was undetectable by all known sensors. It mimicked environmental background data. In effect, it was invisible. Damon leaned back, patting Susan's side. She doesn't trust invisible. She identified it, tracked it, attacked it, and then, the Virellan continued, voice rising with awe. She let you retrieve it safely. Damon shrugged. She knows I get grumpy when things explode indoors. The meeting turned from panic to study. Species after species came forward with questions. How did you train her? What does she eat? Is she sapient? Does she respond to emotion? Could she detect cloaked ships? Damon deflected most with calm deflections. She's not a lab rat, she's Susan. Feed her twice a day, don't stare at her food, and never, never challenge her over sleeping spots. But how do you survive with her? Gelthor asked, exasperated. She exhibits traits of apex aggression, unstoppable determination, complete disregard for size hierarchies. Like I said, Damon smiled, she's basically my aunt. Susan let out a belch. Several translators misfired. By the third day, Susan was a legend. Kasari Station's news feed changed formats to accommodate Earth tactical mammal updates. A bronze plaque was installed outside the Cultural Exchange Hall reading, Susan, first of her kind, defender of the ducks. A new regulation was proposed. Section 9b, terrestrial creatures of unverified classification may only attend interspecies events under direct supervision of a certified human handler. Damon got a badge. Susan got a tracking beacon. The beacon lasted 4 hours before she chewed it off. She doesn't like being followed, Damon explained. She is terrifying, the technician muttered, bandaging his fingers. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The biology lab kept the parasite's remains under strict quarantine. Problem was, the remains kept changing. After 48 hours, the tissue reconfigured into an armored larval form. Genetic sequencing failed, the DNA loop was non-standard. Worse, trace analysis of the ductwork revealed molted skin fragments from at least 3 other organisms of the same type, which meant Susan hadn't killed the only one. She'd just spotted the first. Damon stood on the engineering deck, sipping coffee. Susan lay beside a vent, still and alert. She hasn't moved for 30 minutes, said a young technician. Is she asleep? No, Damon said. She's listening. Listening for what? Damon didn't answer. Because just then, Susan rose. Her hackles lifted. And she growled, not in anger. In warning. 3 hours after Susan growled beside the vent, Kasari Station issued its first full alert lockdown in over 70 cycles. The parasite Damon's honey badger had killed in Chapter 2 was only a scout. Now, the station was under silent siege. Damon stood in a narrow access corridor behind the main biolab. Panels buzzed, lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the walls, something skittered. He held a portable motion tracker in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other. Susan led the way. She didn't slink like a cat or dart like a weasel. She marched. Every movement was deliberate, every sniff of the air a calculation. When she paused at a vent junction and looked back at Damon, he followed without question. Still can't believe this, muttered Kosa, the Vorakai security liaison. Her moss pet clung tightly to her chest, trembling. Damon glanced at her. You want to lead instead? She looked down at Susan. The honey badger bared her teeth, half snarl, half yawn. No, Kosa muttered. Proceeding behind the tactical creature is acceptable. Behind them, Administrator Gelthor, 4 biologists, 2 Yilt data engineers, and 1 extremely nervous Virellan journalist, followed with wide eyes and breath held. The corridor was barely tall enough for some of them, especially Gelthor, who had to fold 2 of his arms just to fit. Susan halted. She sniffed again. Then she began digging at a seam in the floor panel. Damon knelt. She smells something. She always smells something, Gelthor whispered. No, Damon said, brushing metal shavings aside. This one's different. Susan clawed the edge of the access plate, claws ringing softly. With a hydraulic clack, the panel lifted. The smell hit everyone at once, not rot, not gas, but something wrong, a biological wrongness, like mold mixed with ozone and heat. Gelthor gagged. That is not authorized vent scent. One of the yilts began glowing pale green, their version of nausea. Damon peered inside. A web of translucent fibers laced through the air duct, pulsing slightly, organic, yet somehow calculated. Parasite residue, maybe even communication threads, and, worst of all, they were recent. Hours old at most. Susan snarled again. She wants in, Damon said. You are not releasing a dangerous predator into the station's oxygen system, Gelthor snapped. I'm not releasing anything, Damon replied, tightening his grip on the wrench. I'm following her. The next hour was chaos. Damon and Susan crawled through a secondary vent path, 3 decks below the cultural hall. The others stayed behind, feeding him real-time maps and sensor data. Not that it helped. The sensors picked up almost nothing. But Susan did. She'd stop mid-step, tilt her head, then veer left always just before Damon would have stumbled into an acid secretion or a bio-web trap. Twice, he watched her freeze, sniff, and backtrack, just before a structural seam shimmered and cracked open, revealing one of the parasites. They weren't fully physical. Worse, they were learning. The first few Damon encountered looked like scuttling bugs, sharp and fast, but still beasts. The next ones, they waited, ambushed, camouflaged more effectively. And still, Susan tore through them without hesitation. The tactical creature moved like fury in a small jacket of fur. One parasite lunged from above, she slammed it midair, grabbed it with her teeth, and flung it so hard it ruptured against a wall. Damon caught the splatter on his suit. You okay? Came Gelthor's voice over the comms. Damon wiped green fluid from his faceplate. This stuff acidic? Extremely. Cool. 30 minutes later, the pattern became clear. The parasites weren't nesting randomly, they were building towards something. All the paths led inward towards central airflow control. The ducts widened. The webbing grew thicker. And Susan, for the first time, slowed down. Not in fear. In focus. They reached a final access panel. Damon held back. Susan sniffed, once, twice, then slammed it open with both front paws. The chamber, beyond, was dark. Massive. And alive. The parasite nest sprawled across the airflow hub. Hundreds of creatures in varying stages of development moved in silence. A central mass taller than Damon, wide as a hover truck, pulsed with heat. Tendrils connected it to every surrounding vent, like a biohacking system. It wasn't just feeding on the station. It was learning how to become it. Susan growled. Then charged. What followed would later be called the Badger event. Susan leapt onto a power relay, bounced off a control pedestal, and dove straight into the core of the nest. Claws whirled, teeth flashed, parasites screamed. Damon followed, shouting, wrench in hand, swinging at anything that moved. He activated the emergency vent purge as Susan tore into the core mass. Alarms blared. Atmosphere whooshed. Parasites tumbled into vacuum vents or splattered against walls. The central node convulsed the creature, tried to adapt, tried to absorb the purge, but Susan had already bitten deep into its core. It pulsed once, twice, then ruptured. Damon yanked Susan away as acid veins burst open. They tumbled back into the side passage, both covered in gore and bits of chitin. Containment achieved, he panted into the comms. Silence. Then Gelthor's voice. You brought that creature to a petting zoo. Cleanup took days. Crews cleared bioresidue from over 70 vent systems. Security recalibrated internal sensors with new parasite metrics, all based on Susan's movement patterns. And Susan? She slept for 23 hours. Flat on Damon's bunk, wrapped in a thermal blanket, head resting on a disassembled air filter. The hero of the station, though she would have probably just said, nap time. The final council report declared the parasite an undocumented invasive organism, possibly a space-borne life form that clung to a trade ship's hull. undetectable to sensors, immune to most scans, fully integrated with ventilation systems. Except, none of it explained why Susan had known. Long before any alarm, before any sign, she had sensed it. When asked for a theory, Damon just said, instinct. But some of the scientists whispered other ideas. Sapient threat detection? Neurological hazard mapping? Or, is she just better than us? A week later, a revised rule was quietly added to the official cultural exchange guidelines. Section 12C, subheading Earth. No Earth fauna shall be permitted in cultural exchange without a bonded human present at all times. In cases involving small mammals exhibiting tactical behavior, station-wide security will defer to the human's judgment. Special addendum. If the creature answers to the name Susan, proceed with fear. Susan woke before dawn shift cycle. No one else noticed, not at first. Most of Kessery Station was still in power conserve mode, soft-lit corridors humming with low energy. The parasite threat had been declared neutralized. Ventilation systems had been flushed, sterilized, reinforced. But Susan didn't believe in declarations. She believed in movement. She slipped from Damon's quarters, bypassing the newly installed animal gate with a headbutt. She stalked the hallway with purpose, claws silent against the poly floor. The cameras didn't trigger. She'd learned where they were. Avoided them. She always learned. In Engineering Deck 6, she stopped at an unused duct, tilted her head, listened. Nothing moved. But she could smell it. Damon found her an hour later, seated beside the duct, eyes fixed, tail low. He crouched beside her. Again? She didn't blink. Damon exhaled and tapped his comm. This is Hale. Engineering, Deck 6. I need a scan team. They didn't argue anymore. By midday, the new scans were in. More filaments. Faint, dormant. Not enough to trigger alarms. But enough for Susan to notice. Enough to make Damon request full reinspection of the secondary maintenance decks, the ones no one had touched in decades. The ones with legacy systems left over from the station's original builders. That's where they found the nest. Small, incomplete, but growing. Jelthor's eyes jittered when he saw it. Another? It didn't come in with the last batch, Damon said. It was already here. The implications spread like shockwaves. The parasite hadn't snuck aboard. It had always been aboard. Waiting. A new investigation began. Teams traced shipping logs, docking records, and forgotten blueprints. The parasite's origin couldn't be pinpointed, only theorized. Maybe it evolved inside the station, feeding off waste heat. Maybe it was seeded by accident from a probe centuries ago. Maybe it came in hiding. But Susan had found it. Again. And that changed everything. The council gathered once more. Not in panic. In policy. The Virellans proposed an Earth-specific subcommittee on xenofauna threat response. The Vorakai suggested integrating Earth animal scent profiles into early warning systems. The Yilt simply requested 3 Susan plush replicas for study. Susan sat on a cushion, licking her paws. She was no longer a curiosity. She was a presence. A known variable. A tactical specialist. Don't give her a title, Damon warned as they debated. Why? Jelthor asked. She'll start acting like she outranks us. Susan sneezed. A month passed. No new nests. No parasite resurgence. But Susan remained vigilant. She took regular patrols, now not ordered, not requested. She moved through decks with an unofficial clearance the crew had all agreed to never discuss. Damon installed a door sensor that beeped "good girl" when she passed. She ignored it. She preferred results over praise. On the 40th day, a diplomatic envoy arrived. High-ranking officials from the Allied Species Assembly, formal robes, ceremonial trappings, and 100 questions. They'd heard about Susan. They wanted to see her. Administrator Jelthor warned them, she's not an exhibit, she comes and goes as she pleases. She stopped a station-wide infestation. She also attacked a moss pet. The delegation insisted. Damon agreed with conditions. 1 human handler, 1 honey badger. No cages, no performances. Just observation. They entered the security briefing room in silence. Susan was already there, lying under the table. A hand twitched toward a snack. Damon held up a finger. I wouldn't. The hand retracted. Susan opened one eye, then rolled onto her side and snored. The delegation watched for an hour. She didn't move. They left shaken. Later that day, Damon found a new note added to the Interstellar Wildlife Classification Index. Earth species designation: honey badger, Mellivora capensis. Threat tier: ambiguous, varies by handler. Recommended protocol: approach only with human present. Or better yet, don't. Back in Damon's quarters, Susan curled on her blanket beside a small heater. He scratched her head. You know you've got them terrified, right? She growled softly, but it sounded more like a purr. You're not just a pet anymore. She flicked her tail. You're a precedent. Susan yawned, baring teeth that had chewed through metal, parasites, and several careers. Then she closed her eyes. Damon leaned back against the bunk, folding his arms behind his head. You're still just Susan to me. 6 weeks after the first nest, Kasari Station declared a new security division: Biological Threat Recognition and Non-Technological Response Unit. The head of the unit? Technician Damon Hale. His partner? Officially listed as classified. Unofficially? Everyone just called her the Badger.